On a dusty road, Darius the Third, King of Kings, lay bound, not by rope but by chains of solid gold. He was a prisoner in his own supply cart. His captors were not his enemies. They were his kin, his generals, the men he trusted most. They put him there. They fashioned the golden chains. So what unspeakable truth about power makes a king more valuable alive and humiliated than dead? And what does that mean for loyalty itself, for the contracts you make and break every day? To understand the gold chains, you need to understand the empire they once represented. Picture Persia in 336 BCE. This is not some forgotten kingdom of sand and ruin. It is the Achaemenid Empire, the largest political entity the world has ever known, a superpower forged by Cyrus the Great 2 centuries earlier. It is a complex, multicultural machine of satrapies and trade routes, of spies and bureaucrats stretching from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India. But it is an old machine, and its gears are beginning to rust. When Artaxerxes IV is poisoned, his cousin, a man named Artashata, is elevated to the throne. You know him by his throne name, Darius the Third. He inherits not just the crown, but the cracks in its foundation. He is, by all accounts, a capable and courageous man, but he is taking command of a ship that is already taking on water. And on the horizon, a storm is gathering. In Macedon, a king has just been assassinated, and his son, a young man of 20 named Alexander, has taken his place. This is not yet a story of a great rivalry. At this moment, Alexander is considered a minor problem, a provincial nuisance on the far western fringe of the Persian world. Darius has rebellions in Egypt and Babylonia to contend with. He has no reason to believe the greatest threat to his existence is a young man who has yet to prove he can even hold his own kingdom together. If you were standing in the grand halls of Persepolis in that year, the smell of cedar wood incense filling the air, you would have laughed at the suggestion that this empire could fall. You would have been wrong. The empire was not a fortress. It was a network of loyalties, and that network was about to be tested to its breaking point. And the way it broke reveals a hidden mechanism of power that is still at work today. And this is where the story stops making sense. The test begins not with a single event, but with a series of escalating tremors. The first comes in 334 BCE. Alexander crosses the Hellespont into Asia Minor, and at the Granicus River, he doesn't just defeat the local Persian satraps, he annihilates their command structure in a single, reckless cavalry charge. Darius, far away in his capital, dismisses it as the luck of an impetuous youth. He begins to assemble the grand army of the empire, a force meant to crush, not merely defeat. A year passes. In 333 BCE, near the coastal town of Bessus, the two forces finally meet. Darius commands from the center of his line, as Persian kings have for generations, a symbol of divine stability. He has over 100,000 men. But Alexander does not fight by the old rules. He identifies the king as the center of gravity and drives his elite companion cavalry directly at him, a spear point aimed at the heart of the empire. The Persian line buckles under the shock, and Darius makes the decision that will ultimately cost him everything. He flees. He turns his royal chariot and runs, leaving the battlefield, his army, and even his own mother, wife, and children to be captured by the Macedonians. If you had been a soldier in the Persian line that day, watching the royal standard disappear over the horizon, you would have felt something colder than fear: contempt. Loyalty is a contract, and the king had just broken his end of the deal. He had chosen his life over their victory. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. Still, the empire is vast. Darius retreats east of the Euphrates and raises a second, even larger army. He spends 2 years gathering forces from every corner of his domain: scythed chariots from Babylon, cavalry from Bactria, elephants from India. He chooses the battlefield himself, a wide, flat plain at Gaugamela, perfect for his numbers and his chariots, a place where Alexander's tactical tricks will be useless. On October 1st, 331 BCE, the battle begins. For a time, it seems to work. The Persian forces hold, their sheer weight of numbers threatening to envelop the smaller Macedonian army. But Alexander does it again. He spots a gap, a momentary weakness in the line near Darius, and he charges. It is Bessus all over again. And once again, Darius flees. This time, it is not a tactical retreat. It is a full-blown rout. The psychological impact is catastrophic. A king who will not stand and die for his own empire is not a king worth following into battle. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a moral collapse. The word spreads through the satrapies like a disease. The king ran, twice. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria and a kinsman of Darius, had fought at Gaugamela. He had watched the king flee. He had retreated with the remnants of the army, a long, bitter march eastward. You can picture him on that march, the cold desert nights punctuated by the low murmurs of disillusioned commanders. He is not just a general, he is a politician, a man who understands that power is a perception. And the perception of Darius was now one of failure and cowardice. He begins to talk to the other powerful men who remain. Nabarzanes, commander of the royal cavalry, and Barsaentes, the satrap of a neighboring province. The conversations start as whispers in the command tent, questions of strategy. But soon they evolve. What is the plan? Where is Darius leading them? Back to another defeat? There is no evidence of a single moment of decision, only a slow creeping consensus. They are following a dead man. The only question is what to do about it. The worst part hadn't happened yet, and the reason nobody stopped it is stranger than anything that came before. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. The end of his reign does not come with the clash of swords or the roar of an army, but in the suffocating silence of his own command tent in the summer of 330 BCE. The pursuit is relentless. Alexander is closing the distance every day. Darius is now in Bactria, Bessus's own territory. He believes he is among his most loyal subjects, his own kin. He summons his commanders to plan the next stage of their retreat into the eastern mountains. Bessus and Nabarzanes enter the tent. The air inside is stale with the smell of old fire and exhaustion. There are no drawn weapons, no angry words. The betrayal is quiet, procedural, and absolute. They simply inform their king that he is no longer in command. They tell him he is a liability, that his presence invites Alexander's pursuit and guarantees their destruction. They offer him a choice that is not a choice: abdicate in favor of Bessus and live as a protected figurehead, or be treated as a prisoner. Darius refuses. He draws his own dagger, not to fight. It is 2 against 1, and their guards are just outside, but perhaps to fall on it. But they stop him. A king's suicide is an ending. They needed him for what came next. Think of the person in your life you trust without question, the one whose loyalty you have never had to doubt. Now, picture them calmly explaining to you that your life, as you know it, is over, and they are the ones ending it. That is the moment for Darius. It is the hollow-eyed shock of realizing the monster was never at the gate. It was in the room with you all along. They strip him of his royal insignia and lead him outside. He is placed not on a horse, but in a common ox cart, a covered wagon used for baggage or women. And then, as the final unspeakable humiliation, they bind the King of Kings in chains forged of solid gold. What they found when they finally opened the door changed everything, and not in the way anyone expected. Here's where it gets worse. This was not an act of chaotic desperation. What you're seeing here is the blueprint of a coup, and the golden chains are the key. This wasn't about simple murder. Bessus wasn't just a traitor. He was an aspiring successor. He immediately proclaimed himself the new King of Kings, taking the throne name Artaxerxes V. He began issuing edicts, attempting to rally the eastern provinces to fight a renewed war against the Macedonian invaders. The betrayal of Darius wasn't the end of the war. It was meant to be the beginning of a new, more effective one. And Darius, alive and in chains, was his most important political asset. A dead Darius is a martyr, but a captive Darius is a symbol of the old, failed regime. Bessus could display him, a living testament to the weakness he was replacing. The golden chains were not merely an insult, they were a piece of political theater. They were a message to every other satrap. The source of our collective failure is now contained, bound by the very wealth he could not defend. We are in control now. This was a calculated transfer of power. And here's what should make you deeply uncomfortable. This cold logic is not an anomaly of the ancient world. It is the permanent, unchanging calculus of power. When a leader is perceived as a liability to the institution they lead, the system will move to isolate and neutralize them, often while maintaining a public fiction of respect. You have seen this pattern play out a dozen times in your own lifetime, in boardrooms and in governments. The plan was methodical, it was rational, and it was almost brilliant. But it failed to account for one variable, the man hunting them. And what Alexander did next was the part they worked hardest to bury. A revelation about the true nature of power that will change how you see every headline. What you now understand, and what most people never will, is that Alexander's pursuit of Darius was never about military victory. Gaugamela had already decided that. This was about something far more important, the symbolic transfer of legitimacy. Alexander didn't want to be a foreign conqueror. He wanted to be the rightful heir to the Persian throne. Capturing Darius alive was the prize. It would allow him to be magnanimous, to pardon the old king and receive the crown from his hand, a peaceful and legitimate succession in the eyes of the Persian nobility. A living Darius was the key to unlocking the entire empire without decades of insurgency. When Alexander's scouts brought him the news that Darius had been betrayed and imprisoned by his own men, the entire strategic calculation changed. The chase was no longer a pursuit. It was a rescue mission. Or at least, that is what it had to look like. Alexander rode his cavalry to the point of collapse, a desperate, high-speed chase across northern Iran. He knew what Bessus was doing. He knew that a new, competent Persian king rallying the still untouched eastern half of the empire was a far greater threat than the twice-defeated Darius. But he also saw the opportunity Bessus had unwittingly handed him. The betrayal gave Alexander a new role to play. He could stop being the invader and start being the avenger. The system at play here is not war, it is public relations. The real horror is not the death of one man, but the cold, systemic logic that made his death more valuable than his life to every single person involved. Bessus needed him captured to legitimize his own rule. Alexander needed him captured to legitimize his rule. Darius himself had become a political object, a token whose only value lay in who possessed him. As Alexander's small force finally closed in on the conspirators' column near the Caspian Gates, that value changed one last time. For Bessus, a living Darius about to be rescued by Alexander was now the ultimate liability. The asset had become a threat. The man in the wagon had to be silenced. The logic of the system demanded it. The answer to the question you've been sitting with this entire video is this. The golden chains were the symbol of a failed strategy. They were the instruments of a political calculation that backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Bessus and his co-conspirators, Nabarzanes and Barsaentes, kept Darius alive not out of mercy, but out of ambition. They intended to hand him over to Alexander, hoping to receive favor, perhaps to be confirmed in their own satrapies as puppet governors. Or, failing that, to use him as a rallying point for a new Persian resistance under their command. He was their insurance policy. The chains were a way to control the policy without destroying it. But when their scouts screamed that Alexander's cavalry was just over the ridge, that the Macedonians had ridden faster than anyone thought humanly possible, the calculation inverted. A living Darius, rescued and restored to his throne by Alexander, would mean their immediate and brutal execution. The insurance policy had to be liquidated. In a panic, they ran their spears through the king in the back of the wagon and scattered, leaving him to bleed out alone in the dust. When the first Macedonian soldier, a man named Polystratus, finally reached the cart, he found the King of Kings in his final moments, able only to ask for water. Darius died not because of a grand betrayal, but because of a panicked, last-minute improvisation. The golden chains were for a king they wanted to control. The spears were for a witness they needed to erase. The wagon stands empty on the dusty plain. The gold chains, now evidence in a murder, are taken as a trophy. Alexander arrives to find the body, and in a final act of political theater, he covers it with his own cloak, promising to avenge the fallen king. He will hunt Bessus for a year, capture him, and have him executed in the most gruesome Persian manner, solidifying his claim as the legitimate successor. But the image that remains is not the victorious conqueror. It is the man in the cart, abandoned by everyone. The next time you see a leader fall, in politics, in business, anywhere, remember the logic of the golden chains. The pattern has not changed. The initial move is never to destroy, but to contain, to manage, to turn the powerful into a harmless symbol. The final, fatal move only comes when that symbol is about to be rescued by someone else. The real danger is never the enemy you can see coming. It's the ally standing beside you who has just finished calculating that you are worth more to them as a martyr than as a leader. Tell me in the comments, which part of this stayed with you?